They say weddings are supposed to be a celebration of love, a gathering of family. But at my daughter's wedding, I found myself seated at the edge of the festivities, a mother made to feel like a stranger. When she slapped me across the face at the dinner table, her eyes flashing with anger, her voice shrill with accusations, I felt something inside me shift. A smile spread across my lips, slow and steady, like a promise. I knew in that moment that she would regret it. Hit the subscribe button right now and tighten your seatbelts, because in that single humiliating slap, she unleashed a storm she never saw coming. They say weddings are supposed to be the happiest days of our lives, a time to gather everyone you love in one place, to celebrate beginnings, to toast to futures bright with hope. But as I stood outside the tent with my name card trembling in my hand, I wondered who had written that rule. Because from where I stood, the wedding felt like a theater of illusions, a carefully curated performance where I was a character no one wanted in the script. The air smelled of cut roses and rich perfume, a scent that clung to the fabric of every dress but didn't reach me, stationed like a gatekeeper at the edge of the celebration. A steady line of waiters glided past me with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, eyes averted, pretending I didn't exist. I clutched the gift box tighter, an antique necklace, pearls that had belonged to Tom's grandmother, carefully cleaned and restrung to be my daughter's something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. Except, now it felt like an anchor around my heart. Inside the tent, laughter swirled like expensive champagne, effervescent and exclusive. White linens draped tables set with silver and crystal, a constellation of wealth I had quietly subsidized over the years. Deposits on the venue, half the catering bill when costs rose, the florist's down payment, all the small sacrifices that mothers make without asking for applause. The band tuned their instruments, a cello's low hum vibrating through the ground, reminding me of the music Tom used to play late at night when he couldn't sleep. I thought of Tom then, how he would have smoothed my hair and kissed my temple, reminding me that family came first, that love meant showing up even when it hurt. But Tom was gone, taken from us by a faulty boiler and a manila envelope containing his hard hat and wedding ring. And so it fell to me to carry the weight of love, to stitch every broken seam in Marissa's life, to fill every space her father's absence left behind. A young man with a headset, a wedding planner probably, appeared in front of me with a clipboard and a rehearsed smile. "Name?" he asked, too busy to look up. "Susan Callahan," I answered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand. His brow furrowed, scanning the pages. "Ah, table 15. My heart lifted for a brief second. Table 15 sounded close enough to the action, maybe even near the family. But when he pointed, my stomach turned. "It's just outside the tent, near the service entrance," he said, gesturing toward a table perched between a stack of folding chairs and the kitchen's back door. "A lovely view," he added, oblivious to the tight smile I managed to hold. A lovely view of the trash bins, the smells of discarded food, the staff's hurried footsteps. I had spent nearly 3 decades putting Marissa first, working overtime to afford her braces, her soccer team fees, her college tuition. I had missed dentist appointments, skipped lunches, ironed dresses late at night until my eyes burned. And now, at her wedding, the day I had dreamed of sharing with her, I was a footnote, a cautionary tale told in whispers. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, an oversight. That's what I had told myself for too many years, every time Marissa forgot to call, every time she canceled plans with a last-minute text. But the tight lines around Victoria Brix's mouth as she swept by in her designer dress, her dismissive glance in my direction, it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I forced my feet to move, each step heavier than the last. The gravel crunched under my heels, mocking me with every sound. At the table, my table, A single place setting awaited. White china, silver utensils, a folded card with my name, written in elegant calligraphy that only deepened the insult. Around me, other guests filtered into the tent, greeted with embraces and laughter, glasses clinking in celebration. Marissa's voice rose above the others, a bright, polished laugh that didn't belong to the little girl who used to run to me with skinned knees and tear-streaked cheeks. She had become someone else's daughter, molded by another family's expectations, polished by a world I'd never been invited to enter. I took my seat, pressing the gift box to my chest like a shield. The weight of the pearls felt heavier than it should, as if they carried every unspoken word, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but the scent of garbage wafting from the bins made my stomach twist. A breeze rustled the tent, lifting the flap just enough for me to see inside. Marisa stood radiant in her white dress, arm in arm with Daniel, surrounded by Victoria Brix's flawless circle of friends. She didn't look for me. She didn't see me. And in that moment, a cold clarity settled over me like a cloak. I had spent 28 years teaching Marisa to believe in herself, to reach for her dreams, to never let anyone tell her she didn't belong. But I had forgotten to teach her the most important lesson of all, that love doesn't discard the people who made it possible. I smoothed my second-hand dress, the blue satin catching the late afternoon light. My reflection shimmered like a ghost in the polished silverware, a mother overshadowed by her own sacrifice. Somewhere inside the tent, a band struck up the opening notes of a love song. The notes curled around me like a taunt. I closed my eyes. The smile that formed on my lips wasn't one of joy, but of resolve. A quiet promise that today's humiliation would not be the end of my story. No, today would be the beginning of my reckoning. The tent was alive with chatter and laughter, a living organism of silk, crystal, and polished silver. I watched it from my place beside the bins, the hum of conversation drifting toward me like the echo of a distant world. Inside, Marisa moved among her guests like a practiced hostess, every smile measured, every gesture graceful. Her gown shimmered under the chandeliers, the delicate lace and satin hugging her body in a way that spoke of privilege, of a life curated by money and appearances. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a different scene, one where Marisa would have reached for my hand, pulled me into the circle of light and laughter. A mother's place at her daughter's wedding, standing proudly among family and friends, tears of joy on her cheeks, instead of this bitter cocktail of shame and resignation. But that world wasn't mine. A sudden hush fell over the tent, a collective intake of breath that made me sit up straighter. I leaned forward, straining to see. Marisa stood at the head table, her eyes bright, cheeks flushed. She clinked her glass with a silver knife, commanding attention the way she'd always done since she was a child. First in classrooms, then on soccer fields, now in the spotlight of her own making. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice honeyed with the polish of years spent in debating societies and corporate boardrooms. "Today is the happiest day of my life. I'm so grateful to Daniel's family for their generosity, to Victoria for her incredible support, and to all of you who made this day so special." She paused for effect, letting the applause wash over her. My hands remained still in my lap, the pearls heavy against my skin. "And of course," she continued, her gaze sweeping the crowd without settling on me, "I want to thank my mother." My breath caught. Maybe, just maybe, there was still room in her heart for me. "She's done so much," Marisa said, the smile on her face bright but brittle. "Always sacrificing, always giving, always making sure I had everything I needed to succeed." A tremor ran through me, an old ache that I thought I had numbed long ago. She taught me how to be strong, Marissa continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge. How to fight for what I wanted, even if it meant leaving some things, and some people, behind. A murmur rippled through the guests. I felt the words like a slap, each syllable driving a nail into the coffin of the mother I had tried so hard to be. She raised her glass. "So here's to new beginnings," she said, her smile turning brittle. "And to leaving the past where it belongs." A roar of approval erupted. Glasses clinked, laughter soared, and in that moment, I saw her, truly saw her, as the woman she had become. A woman who no longer needed the mother who had sacrificed everything. I felt a sudden rush of heat rise in my chest, a wave of emotion too big to swallow. My hands trembled, the gift box slipping to the ground, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Heads turned. For a second, the world froze. Marissa's eyes found mine. She saw me. And in that instant, all the love I had given her, all the years of standing in the shadows, all the nights sewing her dresses, all the times I'd skipped my own meals so she could have enough, none of it mattered. Her face hardened. She left the head table with the grace of a queen descending from her throne, her gown trailing behind her like a tattered flag of betrayal. She stalked toward me, her heels sharp on the gravel. "Mom," she hissed, voice low but lethal. "What are you doing out here today?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words died in my throat. "You're embarrassing me," she spat, her eyes gleaming with anger. "I can't believe you're making a scene at my wedding." I stared at her, unable to comprehend. "Marissa." "Don't you dare!" she snapped, her voice rising. Guests began to murmur, necks craning to see. "Don't you dare make this about you." My cheeks burned, the shame cutting deeper than any wound. "I'm not—" "Just stop," she said, her voice a whip crack. "You've ruined everything." She raised her hand, and before I could react, her palm struck my cheek, a sharp sound that echoed through the evening air. A collective gasp rose from the tent. I staggered, the pearls slipping through my fingers, landing in the dirt like a final indignity. The world went silent. I touched my cheek, the sting of her slap burning like a brand. My eyes met hers. She was trembling, her breath ragged, but her eyes shone with defiance. "You've always been a burden," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Always holding me back, always making me feel guilty. Well, I'm done. I'm done with you." The tears threatened to come, but I swallowed them down. I stood taller, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, deliberately, I smiled. It was a small, tight smile, one that spoke of years of quiet strength and sacrifice, of a reckoning long overdue. It was a smile that promised the consequences she had never imagined. Her face paled. I bent down and picked up the pearls, brushing the dirt from their surface. I cradled them in my hand like a relic, a reminder of the history she had tried so hard to erase. When I looked up, she was gone, swallowed by the tent, by her new life, by the people who had convinced her that I was nothing more than an obstacle. But she had made one mistake. She had underestimated me. The night air pressed against my skin, thick with the scent of roses and spilled champagne. I stood motionless for a moment, feeling the sting of Marissa's slap still hot on my cheek. The laughter inside the tent rose in waves, mingled with the clinking of glasses and the hum of polite conversation. A world I had once belonged to, now closed to me. I held the pearls in my hand, each one like a tiny moon, glowing softly under the tent's glow. Tom's grandmother's pearls, the same ones he had fastened around my neck on our wedding day, his hands trembling with love. He had called me his queen then, his steady rock in a world that didn't always make sense. Those pearls had meant something to me once, a promise, a heritage, a reminder that love could bind people together. But tonight, under the glare of 100 indifferent eyes, they felt like a chain, each pearl a link forged by sacrifice and silence. I turned the necklace over in my palm, the tiny clasp catching on the rough skin of my thumb. My nails were ragged, my dress secondhand, and the smell of garbage wafted from the bins behind me. In that moment, I saw myself as they must have seen me. A woman out of place, too plain, too ordinary, too real. Ben Morales, the wedding planner, appeared at my side like a guilty ghost, his face pale and drawn. "Mrs. Callahan," he began, voice faltering. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." His words dissolved in the air between us. I could see the sweat on his forehead, the panic in his eyes. He was a man accustomed to making things perfect, to smoothing over the messiness of life with white linens and carefully arranged flowers. He hadn't counted on me making a scene by simply existing. "It's all right, Ben," I said, my voice calm, even as my hands trembled. "I know how these things go." He looked at me, his eyes filling with a pity I couldn't bear. "It wasn't my decision," he stammered. "Victoria, she optimized the space," I finished for him, the words tasting like poison on my tongue. I remembered that phrase from the seating chart. Table 27, optimized for maximum visibility, just not for me. He shifted uncomfortably, his clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. I wanted to fix it, but I waved him off. "You did your job," I said, my voice steely. "Go back inside." He hesitated, then nodded, relief flickering across his face. He turned and disappeared into the tent, leaving me alone in the darkness. I drew a long breath, the cool night air filling my lungs, steadying me. The slap had been the final insult, but the betrayal had been building for years. Each forgotten birthday, each missed phone call, each polite lie told to keep me at a distance. I had given Marissa everything, my time, my money, my very self. I had been mother, father, friend, and protector. And this was my reward. I felt the anger then, a slow burn that began in my chest and spread through my limbs like wildfire. It wasn't the kind of anger that made you shout or throw things. No, it was quieter than that, deadlier. It was the kind of anger that settled into your bones and whispered that you'd had enough. I clutched the pearls tighter, the edges biting into my palm. Inside the tent, Marissa's laughter rose again, bright and brittle, like glass about to shatter. I imagined her surrounded by Victoria bricks and her glittering friends, the ones who had taught her how to erase me. A memory flickered. Marissa at 8 years old, her front teeth missing, a soccer medal clutched in her tiny fist. "Did you see me, Mom?" she had shouted, eyes shining. "Did you see what I did?" I had seen it all. Every scraped knee, every science fair project, every heartbreak. I had seen the tears she thought I hadn't, heard the whispered fears she thought I couldn't. I had been the one who stayed up late, sewing costumes for school plays, baking cupcakes for class parties, finding lost shoes in the middle of the night. And now, here I was, left with nothing but pearls and bruised dignity. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my lips. It felt foreign at first, like trying on a new coat, but soon it felt like armor. Because I realized then that this wasn't about a wedding anymore. This was about every slight, every thankless sacrifice, every time I had put her needs above my own. I didn't realize how heavy the night air could feel until I stepped away from the wedding tent. The laughter behind me turned muffled, a distant echo of a world I no longer belonged to. Every step toward the parking lot felt deliberate, each heel strike on the gravel a small act of defiance. The pearls in my hand were like ice, their cold weight a reminder of the traditions and expectations that had shackled me for too long. My phone buzzed in my purse. Carol. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for her voice, for the anger I knew she'd have on my behalf. Susan? She said, her voice trembling. What happened? I saw a live post from one of Maurice's friends, some nonsense about a scene at the table. Did she really? She slapped me, Carol, I said quietly, pressing the pearls tighter. Right there, in front of everyone. Carol let out a sound halfway between a growl and a sob. That ungrateful, she caught herself. I'm coming over. Don't you dare tell me to stay put. This ends tonight. I almost told her not to come. Almost. But the truth was, I needed her. For years, I'd been the one who comforted others, the one who showed up with casseroles and spare jackets for late-night soccer games, the one who held it all together. I was tired of being the strong one. Okay, I said softly. Hurry. She arrived 15 minutes later, headlights cutting through the dark like twin blades. When she got out, she didn't bother with a hello. She wrapped me in her arms, pressing my head to her shoulder, her embrace as fierce as it was fragile. She hit you, she said, her voice shaking. Your own daughter hit you. She did, I whispered. The words sounded foreign in my own mouth, like they belonged to someone else's story. Carol pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes searching. And what did you do? I hesitated. I smiled, I said. Her eyes widened. You smiled? I nodded. I smiled like a woman who knew it was over, like a woman who's been waiting for that slap all her life. Carol let out a breath, her hand on my cheek. Damn right you did. We stood there in silence for a moment, the night folding around us like a shroud. The tent behind us glowed like a beacon of a world I'd built, but wasn't allowed to enter. Music and laughter still drifted on the breeze, a cruel reminder of everything I'd given and everything I'd lost. Come on, Carol said, taking my hand. Let's get out of here. But first, she reached into my purse and pulled out the wedding folder I'd been carrying since morning. Every contract, every receipt, every line item meticulously documented. This is your power, Sue, she said, flipping through the pages. They think they can treat you like garbage, but they forget who paid the bills. I stared at the folder, at the neat rows of numbers that represented every penny I'd scraped together over the years. I remembered the overtime shifts, the tutoring gigs, the nights I'd skipped meals to save for Marissa's future. Every deposit I'd made had been a silent promise. I'll make this day perfect for her, no matter what it costs me. Now I realized the cost had been too high. They think they own this day, I murmured. They think they own me. Carol's eyes flashed with fire. Then show them who really holds the strings. A strange calm settled over me, the same kind of calm I'd felt the day Tom's supervisor handed me that manila envelope. The day my world had ended, but I'd somehow kept breathing. I had survived then. I would survive now. I flipped to the catering contract. $8,000 still outstanding, due by 3 p.m. today, or the vendor could suspend service without penalty. It was 2:45 p.m. when I'd left the tent, and now it was nearly 3. I checked the bar tab, the flowers, the music. Each one held the same condition. Final payment required day of or services could be withdrawn. Carol, I said, my voice steady. Hand me my phone. She passed it over with a look of fierce pride. I dialed the caterer first. Hello, this is Susan Callahan. I'm calling about the Brick Callahan wedding. A pause. Yes, Mrs. Callahan, the voice on the other end said carefully. Is there a problem? There's a change in circumstances, I said. I won't be able to complete the final payment. Silence. Then, Mrs. Callahan, as per the contract, that means we'll have to stop service immediately. Yes, I said, my smile returning. I understand completely. One by one, I made the calls. Each vendor, each service, each quiet, decisive strike against the empire they had built on my back. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking. Not with regret, but with relief. Carol's grin was electric. You just tore down her perfect day, she whispered. You did what every mother who's been overlooked dreams of doing. I watched the tent, the once perfect world inside now unraveling. My heart beat like a war drum. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of roses and expensive perfume out of the tent and into the night air. It mingled with the acrid tang of the garbage bins behind me, a perfect cocktail of luxury and decay. I stood there, my phone still warm from the calls I'd made, the wedding folder clutched in my hand like a shield. Carol was at my side, her eyes sharp and watchful, every inch the protector she'd always been. Inside the tent, the music faltered, then stopped altogether. Confusion spread like a stain on white linen. I could almost hear the questions forming in the air. Where's the food? Why are the staff packing up? Why is the band leaving? Each one a small crack in the facade of the perfect day. I pictured Marissa standing at the center of it all, her gown a pristine symbol of everything she'd become. Polished, perfect, untouchable. And now, thanks to me, that perfection was unraveling thread by thread. I wondered if she'd feel the way I had felt all those years, watching her drift away from me. Each new success, another reason she didn't need me. A waiter stumbled out of the tent, carrying a half-empty tray of shrimp cocktails, his face pale and stunned. He passed by without a glance, his mind elsewhere, probably on the angry bride demanding explanations. I imagined Victoria Bricks, her hands waving like frantic flags, barking orders at anyone who'd listen. I wondered if she'd finally understand that not everything could be bought, that sometimes even the most carefully curated events could be undone by a single person's will. Carol nudged me, her grin a mix of mischief and triumph. You should see their faces, she whispered. It's like a funeral in there. I didn't smile. Instead, I felt a deep, resonant calm settle over me, a calm I hadn't known in years. It wasn't revenge that filled me, though God knew I'd earned it. It was a sense of balance, like the scales had finally tipped back in my favor. Let them have their chaos, I said softly, my eyes still fixed on the tent. They built that world. Let them live in it. She watched me carefully. What are you going to do now? I turned the wedding folder over in my hands, my fingers tracing the creases and dog-eared corners. Every page in it represented a piece of me. Hours worked, money saved, dreams deferred. It was a record of all the ways I'd put Marissa first. But now, with the contracts canceled and the wedding crumbling, it felt like a burden I no longer needed to carry. I slipped the folder into my purse and zipped it closed. I'm going home, I said, my voice steady. I've done enough. Carol's hand found mine, squeezing it tight. Let me drive you. I shook my head. I need to do this myself. She hesitated, her eyes glistening in the dim light. I'm proud of you, Sue, she whispered. I always have been. But tonight, more than ever. The tears threatened to come, but I blinked them away. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. I turned toward the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my shoes, the wind lifting my hair and carrying it behind me like a tattered flag. I felt the eyes on my back, some curious, some pitying, some angry. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in decades, I was walking away on my own terms. My old Honda sat alone in the far corner of the lot, surrounded by luxury cars that glistened like trophies. I unlocked the door, the familiar creak of the hinges greeting me like an old friend. Sliding into the driver's seat, I placed the pearls carefully on the dashboard. Their soft glow a reminder of all the love I'd given, all the sacrifices I'd made. As I turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed and sputtered before settling into its usual rattling hum. I took one last look at the tent, now a beehive of confusion and panic, and a small smile curved my lips. I had always been the quiet one, the steady one, the woman who smoothed over everyone's rough edges. But tonight, I'd let the edges stay sharp. I'd let the truth out. And the world hadn't ended. I pulled out of the parking lot, the tent receding in my rearview mirror, and with it, the weight of a lifetime of being overlooked. Ahead of me, the road stretched into the darkness, open and unknown. The phone buzzed again in my purse, the screen lighting up with Marissa's name. I let it ring. Some conversations could wait. Tonight wasn't about apologies or explanations. It was about finally choosing myself. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The night air filled my lungs, clean and sharp. The pearls on the dashboard caught the moonlight, each one a tiny star, a reminder that even in the darkest night, there could be light. I tightened my grip on the wheel, the lines on my palms deep and strong. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be anyone's afterthought ever again. A tear slipped down my cheek, hot and unexpected. It wasn't for Marissa. It was for the woman I had been. The woman who had believed that love meant giving until you had nothing left. The woman who had thought that sacrifice was the same as devotion, that martyrdom was just another word for motherhood. A movement caught my eye, a pair of headlights in the distance. The car slowed as it approached, then pulled in behind me. My heart clenched, a reflex of years spent worrying about everyone but myself. But then I saw Carol's old sedan and felt a wave of relief. She stepped out of the car, her coat pulled tight against the chill. She crossed the road and opened the passenger door without asking permission, sliding in beside me like she'd always belonged there. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, unable to speak. She reached over and took my hand, her grip firm and warm. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice unwavering. "You taught her a lesson she needed to learn." I looked at her, my vision blurring. "Did I?" "You did," she said. "You showed her that you're not just a bank account with a pulse. You're a person, a damn good one." A slow smile spread across my face. It felt different than before, like it belonged to a woman who was finally waking up. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "Any time. Now let's get out of here. Let them clean up their own mess." The road curved gently, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of where it might lead. We drove in silence for a while, the night unfolding around us like a dark, quiet ocean. Carol leaned back in the passenger seat, her head turned toward the window. The streetlights cast long shadows across her face, lines etched deep with worry and hard-earned wisdom. I could see the worry in her eyes, the way her fingers drummed lightly against her knee, as if she couldn't quite believe what we had just done, or what I had just done. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse of the wedding tent receding into the distance in my rearview mirror, a glowing monument to all the years I'd poured into making Marissa's life as easy as possible. It was beautiful, no doubt. I had signed the checks that made sure of that. But even from this distance, I could see it unraveling, a ripple of confusion spreading outward like a stain in perfect white linen. "They're probably freaking out right about now," Carol said finally, her voice tight with a kind of grim satisfaction. Victoria Bricks has probably lost her mind. I didn't answer right away. I just kept my hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, my chest tight with something that felt both like triumph and sorrow. I wondered if Victoria's voice had gone sharp and thin, the way it had that day she called me to clarify the seating arrangements. She'd said it so sweetly, as if she were doing me a favor, explaining how she wanted to make sure everyone felt comfortable, as if comfort had anything to do with hiding me near the garbage bins. I used to think she was just protective of Marisa, I said finally, my voice sounding older than I felt. I thought maybe she was trying to fill the space Tom left behind. But I think she's always been this way, sharp, controlling, ready to cut people out if they didn't fit her picture. Carol turned to look at me, her eyes softening. "You've always given people the benefit of the doubt," she said, "even when they didn't deserve it." A bitter laugh rose in my throat. That's what mothers do, right? We make excuses. We swallow our pride. We let them walk all over us because that's supposed to be love. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached over and rested her hand on my forearm, a warm, steady pressure that grounded me. I felt the tears gather, hot and sharp, but I blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. Not tonight. "Marissa's probably called every vendor in the county by now," Carol said, her voice tinged with a humor she didn't quite feel. "But there's no fixing this one. Not today." I exhaled slowly. "Good," I said, surprising myself. It's time she learned that money doesn't buy respect, that you can't erase the people who made you who you are. We reached a stoplight and paused. The night pressed in on us, thick and heavy. In the quiet, I could almost hear Tom's voice, gentle, encouraging, always believing the best in people. He'd have been proud of me tonight, even if part of him would have tried to soothe Marissa's temper first. I'd always loved that about him, his hopefulness, his faith. But that had been my burden too, carrying his hope after he was gone, wearing it like armor even when it cut into my skin. The light turned green. I drove on, the hum of the engine filling the space between us. Carol shifted in her seat, turning toward me with a question in her eyes. "Sue," she said, voice soft, "do you think she'll ever understand what you did? Why you did it?" I thought about that, my fingers tightening on the wheel. The image of Marisa in her wedding dress, her face hard with anger, came back to me. The way she'd looked at me, like I was something to be ashamed of, something to hide. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But tonight, that's not my problem. Tonight, my problem is me, and I'm okay with that." A small, sad smile crossed Carol's face. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "Always have been." I wanted to believe her. For so long, I'd been the quiet one, the fixer, the one who made everything okay. Tonight, I wasn't okay, but I was honest. And that felt like enough. We turned onto my street, the small houses lined up like weary soldiers in the darkness. My own house looked different tonight, less like a cage, more like a refuge. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. Carol reached over and squeezed my hand one more time. "You call me if you need anything," she said. "Day or night." "I know," I whispered. She got out and closed the door gently, her footsteps receding down the sidewalk. I sat there in the darkness, the pearls still in their box on the seat beside me, and let the quiet settle in. Inside, I knew the phone would start ringing soon. Vendors, lawyers, maybe even Marissa herself. But I didn't dread it. Not anymore. Tonight had been a reckoning, and I'd come out stronger on the other side. The lines on my face told a story of sacrifice, of patience, of love given and sometimes unreturned. But they also told the story of a woman who had finally said enough. The night air was cool and bracing as I stepped out of the car. I picked up the pearls, holding them against my heart for a moment before heading inside. They were mine now, mine to keep, mine to wear, mine to remind me that sometimes, even the quietest women can roar. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the smell of lavender and old wood greeting me like an old friend. The house was quiet, a comforting kind of quiet, the kind that didn't need to be filled with chatter or noise to feel alive. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment as the weight of the night pressed down on my shoulders. My purse slipped from my hand and landed with a soft thud on the floor. The wedding folder peeked out from its half-open zipper, the contracts and receipts now nothing more than relics of a day that would never be what it was supposed to be. I kicked off my shoes, feeling the ache in my feet from hours of standing in borrowed heels, the cheap straps leaving red lines that stung when I moved. I carried the gift box to the kitchen table, setting it down with the care one might give a fragile heirloom. The pearls glistened in the dim light, a soft, stubborn glow that refused to be dimmed by betrayal or disappointment. They were the one thing I had left from a love that had been real, a love that had survived broken paychecks and sleepless nights and the slow erosion of dreams. I traced a finger over the velvet inside the box, remembering Tom's hands as they'd fastened the clasp around my neck all those years ago. His smile had been wide and easy, his eyes crinkled at the corners from laughing too often in a world that didn't always deserve it. "For my queen," he'd whispered, the words like a promise that I'd always have a place in his heart. I closed the box and placed it gently on the table. That promise was all I had now. My phone buzzed in my purse, the sound sharp and intrusive in the hush of the house. I let it ring. Then it rang again. I sighed and dug it out, the screen lighting up with Marissa's name. For a moment, I just stared at it, the letters blurry through the sudden rush of tears. My thumb hovered over the green button, but I didn't press it. Instead, I let it ring out, each vibration a reminder that I wasn't ready to hear her voice. Not tonight. Not after everything. A part of me wondered what she would say. Would she scream? Would she cry? Would she beg me to come back and fix the mess she'd made? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. The phone went silent. I set it down and stared at it, half expecting it to buzz again. When it didn't, I exhaled slowly and made my way to the living room, the floorboards creaking under my weight like old bones. The wedding photos still lined the mantel, Marissa's smiling face beaming out at me from every angle. Soccer trophies, science fair ribbons, prom dresses. Each one was a testament to a life I had nurtured and built with every sacrifice I'd ever made. I sat on the couch, my knees aching as I sank into the familiar cushions. The house felt bigger than usual, as if all the ghosts of my past had finally stepped back to give me room to breathe. I thought about Carol, her fierce loyalty, the way she had stood by me even when I hadn't asked her to. I thought about Ben Morales, his guilt written all over his face as he'd tried to smooth over the ugliness he'd been paid to orchestrate. And I thought about Marissa, standing there in her white dress, her eyes hard and unyielding as she'd raised her hand to me. The pain of that moment came back like a sharp breath, but this time, it didn't hollow me out. It steeled me. A knock at the door startled me. I rose, cautious, my heart picking up speed. Through the window, I saw Carol's face, lined with worry, her hands wrapped around a paper bag. I opened the door and she stepped in, her eyes searching mine. "I brought you dinner," she said, her voice a little too bright. "I figured you hadn't eaten." I managed a small smile. "You know me too well." She set the bag on the table and pulled out 2 containers. "Lasagna," she said. "Comfort food." We sat together at the table, the pearls between us like a silent witness to everything we didn't say. Carol filled the silence with stories about her husband's latest fishing trip, her voice low and steady, her presence a balm on a night that still felt raw and jagged. When we were done eating, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," she said, her thumb tracing circles on my skin, "you did something tonight that most mothers would never dare to do. You stood up for yourself." I looked at her, the tears finally breaking free. "It shouldn't feel so hard," I whispered. "Standing up for yourself." She squeezed my hand. "No, it shouldn't," she agreed. "But it does. And you did it anyway." I nodded, wiping my eyes. The night had taken its toll, but I wasn't broken. Not anymore. In the stillness that followed, I realized that maybe this was what freedom felt like. Not a grand gesture, not a dramatic exit, but a quiet, steady choice to love myself the way I had always loved everyone else. The night wore on, a slow, unhurried procession of shadows and sighs. After Carol left, I cleaned up the dinner plates, her lasagna already cold and half-eaten, but it didn't matter. Even unfinished, it tasted like comfort, like love in a world that too often felt stingy with both. The kitchen was quiet, the old clock ticking on the wall with the steady patience of a teacher's metronome. It reminded me of the afternoons I'd spent grading papers at this same table, Marissa's voice floating down the hallway from her room, 100 questions that always needed answering. I ran the dishcloth over the counter, the motions automatic, my mind elsewhere. I'd always been the one to clean up, to make sure everything was in its place, to patch the cracks before anyone noticed. Tonight, the cracks were wide open, and I felt no compulsion to fill them. The pearls sat in their box on the table, the soft glow of them catching the light as if they had something to say. I reached for them, my fingers trembling as they brushed the cool surface. They felt different tonight. No longer a symbol of sacrifice, but a reminder of a woman who had given too much and asked for too little. I thought about Marissa's face, the hard line of her jaw as she'd raised her hand to me. I'd replayed that moment over and over, the disbelief, the sting, the silence that had followed. In that instant, the mother I had been for 28 years had died, and in her place stood a woman I was only just beginning to understand. The phone rang again, sharp and insistent. This time I let it go to voicemail, the screen glowing with Marissa's name. I didn't need to hear her voice to know what she'd say. Pleas wrapped in blame, demands tied up in apologies that weren't apologies at all. The daughter I'd raised would have known better, but the woman she'd become saw me as an obstacle. I sank into the armchair by the window, the old upholstery familiar and comforting. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the front yard, the leaves rustling in the breeze like whispered conversations. I wondered what the neighbors would say when they heard. I could almost see Mrs. Henderson peering through her curtains, her lips pursed in disapproval, or maybe in pity. A part of me wondered if I cared. Another part knew I didn't. My hands rested on the arms of the chair, strong and calloused from years of work, holding chalk, holding books, holding Marissa when she cried over skinned knees and broken hearts. Those same hands had ironed dresses, mended soccer uniforms, written checks for braces and field trips and college tuition. Tonight, those hands had dialed numbers and cut strings, one by one, with a surgeon's precision. I picked up the pearls and draped them around my neck, the weight of them familiar, comforting. I held the clasp in my fingers, remembering Tom's warm breath on my neck the first time he'd fastened them, the way his hands had trembled just a little. A love that had held me together, long after he was gone. A knock at the door startled me. For a moment I thought it might be Carol again, coming back to check on me, but the knock was too tentative, too unsure. I stood and crossed the room, the floorboards creaking under my feet, each one a familiar protest. Through the window, I saw Ben Morales, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled and untucked, his clipboard nowhere in sight. I hesitated before opening the door, my fingers brushing the pearls at my throat. "Mrs. Callahan," he began, his voice hoarse. I wanted to talk to you." I stepped back and let him in, the smell of sweat and panic following him like a second skin. He hovered in the entryway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes darting around the room like a man searching for an exit. "I'm sorry," he blurted, his hands twisting together. "I never wanted this. I tried to—" I raised a hand, silencing him. "Ben, sit down," I said, my voice calm, even. He obeyed, sinking into the couch like a man half his size. His eyes met mine, and for the first time that night, I saw the boyish fear beneath the polished wedding planner. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his voice trembling. "About the seating, the arrangements," Victoria insisted. I tried to push back, but you didn't," I finished for him, my tone sharper than I intended. He flinched. "I'm sorry," he repeated, the words falling like stones between us. "I was trying to keep my job. I didn't think—" "You didn't think about me," I said, the calm slipping away, my voice cold. "You didn't think about the woman who paid the deposits, who funded the flowers and the catering and the music. You thought about them, the ones who could ruin your reputation if they didn't get what they wanted." He bowed his head. "You're right," he whispered. "I failed you." I watched him, the man who'd played his part so well, who'd orchestrated every detail of a day that had left me outside with the garbage. And for a moment, I pitied him, because I knew what it was like to put someone else's needs above your own. "It's over now," I said, my voice softening. "Go home, Ben. You did what you thought you had to do." He nodded, relief and shame mingling in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, standing. "I'm so sorry." I watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him. The night air rushed in, cool and bracing. I touched the pearls at my throat, the weight of them a promise. Tonight, I had stood up for myself, and tomorrow, I would do it again. Sleep came in fragments that night, thin and restless, like scraps of a dream that wouldn't settle. I woke in the small hours, the house creaking with its own ghosts, the pearls still at my throat. They'd been there since I'd put them on, a shield, a comfort, a reminder that I hadn't always been alone. I rolled them between my fingers, feeling the smooth coolness against my skin, and thought about Tom's hands, steady and warm, fastening them all those years ago. The memories came in waves, our wedding day in that small church with the cracked plaster ceiling, the way Tom had looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. We hadn't had much, but we'd had each other, and somehow that had been enough. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold, the boards old and worn, but it felt good beneath my feet. Solid. Real. I gathered my robe around me, tying it tight at the waist, and made my way to the kitchen. The clock on the wall said 3:02 a.m. The kettle rattled on the stove as it heated, the steam a white ghost that rose and vanished. I watched it, remembering the nights I'd waited up for Marisa to come home from her teenage escapades, the worry chewing holes in my heart. I'd sat at this very table, waiting for the click of the door, the relief that came when she walked in safe, even if she barely spared me a glance. She'd been my world then, the axis my life spun around. I'd thought that was what mothers were supposed to be. I hadn't known that someday she'd turn that axis on me, casting me off like an old coat that didn't fit her new life. The kettle whistled, a sharp sound that snapped me back to the present. I poured the water into my chipped mug, watching it swirl around the tea bag, darkening the water like an old bruise. I cupped the mug in my hands and inhaled the steam, letting the heat seep into my bones. A sudden rap at the door made me jump, the tea sloshing over the rim and scalding my hand. I set the mug down and stared at the door, my heart thudding. Another knock, louder this time, insistent and impatient. I crossed the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the linoleum. I pulled back the curtain, and there she was. Marisa. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. She looked less like the polished bride from earlier, and more like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare. But the expression on her face wasn't fear. It was fury. I opened the door a crack, the chain still on. "It's late," I said, my voice calm despite the tremor in my chest. "Mom, open the door," she demanded. "Now." I didn't move. "Why are you here?" "Because you ruined everything," she spat, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what you did to me tonight? People are leaving early, the band packed up, the caterers walked out. Victoria is threatening to sue everybody." I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe, but it was quickly extinguished. "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "I just stopped paying for it." She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "How could you? On my wedding day." My hand went to the pearls at my throat. "You made a choice today, Marisa," I said, my voice low and steady. "You chose to humiliate me, to erase me. You made that choice, and I made mine." Her lips trembled, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal's. "I had to," she whispered. Victoria said," I repeated, the words sour on my tongue. "And what did you say, Marisa? When she told you to put me next to the trash? When she told you to hide me so I wouldn't embarrass her perfect day?" She didn't answer, and the silence between us stretched like an open wound. I unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She brushed past me, her perfume mingling with the night air, sharp and cloying. She paced the kitchen like a caged animal, her hands fluttering at her sides. "I didn't want this," she said, her voice breaking. "I just wanted everything to be perfect." "Perfect," I echoed. "Even if it meant pretending your mother didn't exist." She turned to me then, her eyes brimming with tears. "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared you'd ruin it. Scared you'd remind everyone where I came from. I wanted them to see me as someone who belonged there." The words hit me like a blow. "So you hid me," I said, "because I didn't fit." She nodded, the tears spilling over now. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I didn't mean—" I held up a hand. "No," I said. "You did mean it, and now you have to live with it." She crumpled onto a chair, her sobs loud and ugly. I watched her for a long moment, the ache in my chest deep and hollow. "You always belonged with me," I said finally. "But I don't know if I belong with you anymore." She buried her face in her hands, and I turned away. The kettle whistled again, and I lifted it off the stove. Outside, the night waited, vast and silent, the darkness a promise of something I wasn't sure I wanted. But I knew one thing. I would no longer let myself be hidden. Not for her. Not for anyone. Marissa's sobs echoed through the kitchen, each one jagged and raw, filling the small space with a sound I'd never heard from her before. It was a child's cry, stripped of the polish and sharp edges she'd perfected over the years. But I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. Not anymore. I leaned against the counter, my hands braced on the worn laminate, the weight of the night settling into my bones. The pearls at my throat felt heavy, each one a reminder of the love I'd given and the silence I'd accepted. Tom's voice lingered in my memory. a warm balm against the cold ache inside me. He would have tried to comfort her, I thought. He would have given in. But Tom wasn't here, and I had spent too many years being both mother and father, too many years smoothing over her messes with a smile. "Mom," she gasped between sobs, her voice breaking. "Please, I need you to fix this." I closed my eyes, the words slicing through me like a blade. It was always the same, my role as fixer, peacemaker, the glue that held her fragile world together. I opened my eyes, meeting her gaze with a steadiness I didn't feel. "I can't fix this, Marisa," I said, my voice low but firm. "Not this time." Her head shot up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide and disbelieving. "But you always fix things. You always, quotation mark." "Not anymore," I interrupted, my voice sharp as glass. "I spent my whole life making sure you had what you needed. I worked late nights, gave up my own dreams, sold my mother's silver tea set to pay for your soccer trips. I did everything, everything, to make sure you never went without. And tonight, when you had the chance to show me even a shred of respect, you put me by the trash." She flinched, her tears falling faster now. "I didn't mean—" "You did," I said, my voice softer now but no less certain. "You meant it because it made your life easier. You meant it because it fit the picture you wanted to paint for them." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't want them to know." "That you came from a woman who taught third grade and bought her dresses secondhand?" I asked, the bitterness slipping out before I could stop it. "That's what you were hiding, Marisa. Not me. Yourself." Her sobs quieted then, the silence stretching between us like a tightrope. I watched her carefully, searching for the daughter I had raised, the girl who used to bring me daisies from the yard, who'd cry when she lost a soccer game and bury her face in my lap. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who saw me as an inconvenience. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, her voice so small it almost disappeared. I let out a long, shuddering breath. "You can't," I said. "Some things you can't fix with a pretty smile and an apology. Some things you have to sit with, even when they hurt." She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked, her voice trembling. I pressed a hand to my chest, the ache sharp and deep. "Forgiveness isn't the problem," I said. "It's trust. It's respect. And I don't know if I can get that back." Her lips quivered, her shoulders slumping. "But I'm your daughter," she said, as if that were enough. "I know," I said quietly, "and I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean I have to let you hurt me." She bowed her head, the tears dripping onto the table. The sound was soft, like rain. "I think you should go," I said, my voice trembling now. "You need time to figure out who you are without me cleaning up your mess." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Where will I go? What will I do?" I met her gaze with a steadiness that surprised me. "That's for you to decide," I said. "I've carried you long enough." She stood, her movements slow and uncertain, as if the weight of the night had finally settled on her shoulders. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but I wasn't sure if it was for me or for herself. I didn't answer. I couldn't. She opened the door and stepped into the night, the cool air rushing in to fill the space she left behind. I closed my eyes, the tears slipping free now, quiet and hot on my cheeks. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this. I was done hiding by the trash. I was done living in the shadows of someone else's life. I was done being less than I was. The house felt emptier after Marisa left. a hollow quiet that settled in the corners like dust. I stood in the doorway, the night air drifting in, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant traffic. I closed the door gently, the latch clicking with a finality that felt like both an ending and a beginning. For a long moment, I just stood there, my hand resting on the worn wood, breathing in the silence. My eyes drifted to the wedding folder on the table, its edges frayed, pages sticking out at odd angles. It was more than just paperwork. It was a testament to all the sacrifices I'd made, the long hours and late nights, the checks written in quiet determination. I thought of every time I'd chosen to do without, so she could have more. Every dream I'd folded away like an old blanket. I walked over and opened it, flipping through receipts and contracts, my fingerprints smudged into the corners. The deposits paid, the balances due, the endless notes I'd scribbled in the margins, flowers, band, catering. I'd built that day for her, brick by careful brick, every detail chosen with love. But in the end, it hadn't been enough to earn me a seat at the table. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest, the ache settling in my ribs. I wasn't sure what I would do with it now. Maybe burn it in the fireplace, watch the years of sacrifice turn to ash. Maybe keep it in a box somewhere, a reminder of what I'd learned the hard way, that love can't be bought, and neither can respect. A sudden noise broke the quiet, my phone vibrating on the counter. I picked it up, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. For a moment, I hesitated. Maybe it was Victoria's lawyer, or another vendor chasing a final payment. Or maybe it was Marissa again, calling from a different number, trying to find a way back into a space she'd destroyed. I swiped to answer, my voice steady. Hello? Mrs. Callahan? A woman's voice, calm and professional. This is Margaret Winters from the Tribune. I'm following up on the story about the Brick Callahan wedding. I closed my eyes, the weariness washing over me. I have nothing to say, I began, but she cut me off gently. I understand, ma'am, but I wanted to let you know that we're running a piece tomorrow. It's fair, balanced. I spoke to several vendors, and I wanted to make sure you knew that the story reflects the facts. I opened my eyes, my fingers tightening around the phone. And what facts are those? That you paid every deposit on time. That you were the one who made sure the vendors got started on that wedding. That you were treated less than respectfully at the event. Her voice softened. Mrs. Callahan, people should know the truth. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, I said quietly. That's more than I expected. Sometimes the truth needs a voice, she replied, even if it's a quiet one. She hung up, leaving me standing there with the weight of her words in my hand. I set the phone down and ran a hand through my hair, feeling the tangles, the way it curled at the ends. Tom used to love my hair, the way it caught the sun. I'd always hated it, too thick, too unruly, but he'd said it made me look alive. I moved to the living room, the walls lined with photos of Marissa through the years. Soccer trophies, spelling bees, graduation days. Each one a frozen moment, a time when I'd been the center of her world. I touched the glass, the cool surface a barrier between me and the girl she'd once been. A knock at the door startled me. I turned, my heart quickening. For a moment I thought it might be Marissa again, come to demand I fix what I hadn't broken. But when I opened the door, it was Carol, her eyes bright and sharp, a brown paper bag clutched to her chest. I couldn't sleep, she said, pushing past me into the house. I figured you couldn't either. She set the bag on the kitchen table and pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 paper cups. Thought we could toast to your new freedom, she said with a wry smile. I laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. Freedom, I echoed, pouring the wine. "It doesn't feel like that yet." She raised her cup. "It will," she promised. "You just need to get used to the idea that you're allowed to be happy without asking for permission." I clinked my cup against hers, the sound sharp in the quiet. "To happiness, then," I said, and took a sip. The wine was warm and cheap, but it tasted like victory. Carol's eyes softened as she studied me. "You know," she said, her voice low, "you were always enough, Sue, even when you thought you weren't." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, warm and heavy, carving new lines in my cheeks. I thought of the empty chair at the wedding, the lonely table by the bins, the way Marisa's eyes had hardened when she'd slapped me. And I thought of the way my own smile had formed in that moment, a quiet rebellion. Freedom wasn't loud. It was a choice, made in the small hours of the night, to love yourself as fiercely as you'd loved everyone else. And in that moment, I chose me. Of course. Here's chapter 13. In the same tone and style, around 500 words. The morning came slow and hesitant, a soft light creeping across the worn wooden floorboards, painting the room in shades of gold and gray. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee in my hands, the warmth seeping into my fingers, the steam curling like a sigh. The house was still. The only sounds the tick of the old clock and the distant call of a mourning dove somewhere outside. I watched the sun rise, watched it inch its way up the sky like a promise, a reminder that the world kept turning even when everything felt broken. The wedding folder sat on the table, closed and final, its edges worn soft from too many nights spent holding it, worrying over it, trying to make sense of something that had never made sense at all. I thought about the phone calls, the contracts, the polite notes scribbled in the margins. I thought about the pearls and the dress and the way I'd ironed it in the early light that morning, hoping, always hoping, that this time would be different. The hurt still sat heavy in my chest, a slow ache that pulsed with every breath. But beneath it, something else had started to grow, a quiet strength, the kind that comes from standing your ground. I had spent my whole life making sure Marisa never went without, smoothing over her mistakes, taking the blame when it was easier than the fight. But now, for the first time, I had let the cracks show. I had let the world see me, not as the perfect mother, but as a woman who had limits, a woman who deserved respect. The phone rang again, its shrill tone slicing through the quiet. I didn't move to answer it. I let it ring, the sound fading into the stillness of the house. There would be time for conversations later, for apologies or explanations, but not now. Now was for me. I stood and stretched, the bones in my back creaking in protest. The day stretched before me, wide and unknown. I thought of the garden out back, the rows of roses that had started to bloom despite the weeds. I thought of the paint swatches in the hallway, colors I'd always wanted but never dared to choose. I thought of the art class at the community center, the one I'd always been too busy to sign up for. I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. This was my time, my story. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of how it might unfold. They say weddings are about family, about belonging, about celebrating love in its purest form. But I've learned that love isn't always about sacrifice or making yourself small to fit someone else's vision of who you should be. Sometimes love is about setting boundaries, about saying no when you've spent a lifetime saying yes. Marisa would always be my daughter, but I had let go of the need to be her everything. She would have to find her own way, just as I was finding mine. Maybe someday we'd meet in the middle, two women with new eyes, seeing each other for the first time. Or maybe we wouldn't. I had made my peace with that too. Tom's pearls still rested at my throat, their gentle weight a reminder of love that had been true and unwavering, of a man who had seen me even when I couldn't see myself. I'd wear them today, and tomorrow, and the day after that, not for Marisa, not for the world, but for me. As I sipped my coffee and watched the world wake up, I felt something shift inside, a quiet certainty that I was more than the sum of my sacrifices. I was a woman who had loved, who had given, and who had learned, finally, to choose herself. That, I decided, was a wedding worth celebrating. Thank you for watching. Her story is one of survival, truth, and finally choosing herself. To hear more stories like this, click on the left and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You are not alone in what you've lived.